Hello again, everyone. Tom Nagorski in the Cipher Brief virtual studio for another conversation about the Ukraine war and specifically today, Russia's next move. The United States and Ukraine have concluded talks at which one of the outcomes was a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. And as the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said, the ball is now in Russia's court. Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, picked up on that phrase. He used it, balls in Russia's court. And now we have heard from, speaking of Russia's court, from Vladimir Putin, who has staked out some new ground himself on the subject. We're going to get to all of this with today's guest, Cipher Brief expert Rob Dannenberg. Great to have you with us, Rob, former chief of operations for the CIA's Counterterrorism Center and chief of the Central Eurasia Division, and somebody with a lot of knowledge about Russia and the Soviet Union before that. And Rob, maybe thanks first of all for being with us. And maybe we'll start with a little bit of the news. As I mentioned, Putin has spoken, and he has said it's sort of a very, very qualified, yeah, we're interested in a ceasefire, but, and among the buts that he repeated, one is he wants an enduring peace, and two, he said, quote, must remove the underlying causes of this crisis. Help us to understand what that's code for or what he may mean.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Putin has for years complained about the eastward encroachment of NATO all the way to Russia's borders, which he says were in violations of various agreements with the United States and the West at or around the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And when he talks about the underlying causes of the war, that's one of the principal causes from his perspective. And the second, of course, is the largely imagined, in my view, security threat posed to the Russian Federation by Ukrainian membership in NATO, or for that matter, membership of the Baltic states in NATO. I mean, the Baltic states have been in NATO for 30 years now, and to my knowledge, there hasn't been a single aggressive military action taken out of any of the Baltic states towards Russia. So, you know, this security threat posed by NATO is largely a figment of Russia's strategic paranoia. And we don't want to spend 20 minutes on this call talking about the reasons why Russia fears invasions from the West and Napoleon. There's a lot of things you could talk about there. But when Putin's talking about the underlying causes of the conflict, it's Ukraine being free, democratic, and potentially a member of NATO. There are other things as well that in Putin's mind, and these can be fanciful, there's not a lot of evidence to support them, and that is the allegations that Putin makes that the Ukrainians are systematically eliminating Russian cultural and historic influence in territories of what is now considered the Ukraine. You know, forbidding the teaching of Russian language, removing Russian cultural objects, the separation of the Ukrainian church from the Russian church. All these things Putin views as hostile acts being taken by the Ukrainian government, and they are something that Russia wants the Ukraine to stop doing. And so that's another principal underlying cause of the war, as Putin describes it.
Yeah. Now, as a practical matter, then, given all that you've said, and of course, it's maybe just an opening gambit in a negotiation that hasn't really started yet, I guess. But that would mean, okay, no NATO membership for Ukraine. That's kind of been handed to them anyway, in terms of public statements made by the Trump administration. No foreign troops in Ukraine, which has been thrown around.
Except Russian and North Korean.
Right. Do you think that to some extent this is sort of being negotiated in an open public way before anybody sits, or the two parties at least sit down at the table together? And is that going to get us anywhere?
Well, I have a very strong point of view that the Trump administration has made a strategic miscalculation from the beginning in its approach to Vladimir Putin, particularly, and the Russian Federation in general. If there's any truisms about negotiating with Russia, one is probably arguably the most important is that you never concede anything to the Russian side, or in this case, your negotiating opponent, before negotiations actually begin. So if one of Putin's principal objectives in invading the Ukraine in the first place was to halt or prevent some of those things that we talked about a moment ago, if you, as part of your pre-negotiation conversations, concede that there's no viable path for Ukraine to join NATO, you've conceded then one big element of what the Russians might be interested in sitting down at the table and negotiating. I suppose the second piece of the strategic error that the Trump administration has made is putting the pressure on the victim in this war. Inviting Zelensky to an ambush, or let's call it a failed meeting in the Oval Office, and then following it, and then expelling him from the White House like a bouncer throwing a drunk out of a bar. I mean, this is the leader of a country that's been invaded, lost thousands of its people, 18% of its territory, enormous damage, suffered war crimes, and we're treating this guy like he's a bum. That's Putin's looking at this and saying, "Oh my goodness, the Americans are doing my job; they're doing my work for me." And then following that up, fast follow with cutting off military aid and intelligence support. You are removing any incentive for Vladimir Putin to negotiate seriously at this point, because we are in the process of accomplishing for Putin what he's been unable to do in almost 4 years of war now.
Before negotiation, yeah.
Now, before even sitting down.
Recognizing excellence in national security, the Cipher Brief Honors Dinner celebrates those who've made a real difference in protecting our nation. It's an unforgettable evening with top leaders in the field. Join us in honoring these remarkable contributions. Reserve your seat now at cipherbriefhonors.com.
Rob, you wrote for us, and it seems like an eternity ago, but I think it's not even 2 months ago, that you wrote for the Cipher Brief a piece about negotiating with Putin, a sort of, the perils and challenges therein. And I pulled a quote from that in preparation for today. You said, "Russia loves to negotiate, however much in bad faith, when it believes it has the advantage." Given everything you've just been talking about, would you say that the Kremlin would feel it has the advantage right now?
Yeah, there's a couple ways, Tom, to interpret that statement. In the article, what I was specifically referring to was the battlefield advantage, and qualified people can disagree about how much of a military advantage the Russian Federation has over the Ukraine at the time that article was written. But now it also incorporates something else, I think. And when Putin looks across the video channel or whatever it is, and sees Donald Trump, he thinks, I've got an advantage over this guy. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of arguments that would support that assertion on my part. First is experience. Vladimir Putin has been effectively running the Russian Federation for 25 years now. He's seen American presidents, British prime ministers, French presidents, German chancellors come and go, and Putin, in his mind, I've outsmarted all of them. I'm still here. I'm just as strong, and I'm securing my historic legacy. And when he looks at Trump, he sees something else. I'm completely apolitical in this sense, but when he sees Trump, he sees somebody who's a relatively naive person in terms of strategic thinking, in terms of understanding foreign and security policy, where Vladimir Putin, considers himself a genius. And the third thing, I suppose, that would be prominent in Putin's mind when he looks across the video channel at Donald Trump is that this guy doesn't prepare. Vladimir Putin, I'm an intelligence officer. I had served a full career. I understand the importance of detail. I study and I prepare and I take seriously the advice and recommendations of my intelligence services when I am meeting with a foreign leader. And you can like or not like Putin. That's not my point. But he's a guy who prepares, and you can't hold an annual national press conference and talk for 3.5 hours every year about subjects ranging from the economy to what's going on in the Russian Orthodox Church, and competently answer those questions if you don't prepare. Vladimir Putin is a detailed guy and he prepares. Donald Trump is not. Talk to anybody who's worked with him in his first administration. If you couldn't fit your briefing on a 3x5 card, Trump wasn't interested in hearing it. Well, that puts you at a disadvantage when you're sitting across the table from a guy who's as prepared as Vladimir Putin. So that's another part. Now, when Putin looks at what's going on in the world relations between the Russian Federation and the United States, what's going on in the battlefield in Ukraine, he thinks he's got the advantage. Both in terms over his strategic opposition and on the battlefield now.
Now, understanding everything you just said, there is this feeling, right or wrong, curious to know your view, that in the weird way the pendulum has moved, and boy, has it been a violent pendulum lately in terms of, just in the last month, I think it's not more than that, how the United States has swung just so significantly towards Kremlin positions. This latest development, the talks that Marco Rubio and his team had in Saudi Arabia with the Ukrainians, and this putting forth of a ceasefire proposal, it does, I'm not sure what the right word is, it not complicate things a little bit for Putin, because the other thing we know is that Donald Trump wants to make a deal. And let me just ask you, does it complicate things for the Kremlin at all?
Well, it does. It does to a certain extent. Despite what I just said about Vladimir Putin feeling he has an advantage over Donald Trump, Putin will be well aware that Trump can be erratic, emotional, and vengeful when he wants to be. And you can have throw a lot of criticism of the Trump administration for how they've managed the Ukraine situation, both during the election campaign, after Trump won the election, and since he's been in office. But I think it's also just, and I've certainly been one of the voices criticizing the administration's approach. But it is, to be fair, you have to say, Trump just wants this war to end, and you know what, the Ukrainians do too. And probably to a certain extent, a lot of Russians do as well. So this objective is, I want this war to end, is, it's a noble objective. However, if the way this war is ended allows Putin to claim victory internationally and to the Russian people, what you're doing then is you're setting the stage for the next war, a bigger war.
Yeah.
The historical precedents are absolutely clear in this respect. So what Putin does not want to do is he doesn't want to provoke the mercurial, emotional, and vengeful side of Donald Trump's personality. So he's got to be a little bit careful now that the administration has negotiated this a commitment on the part of the Ukrainians to a 30-day ceasefire. He can't just reject it out of hand, because then you've heard. Trump has made, I'll destroy Russia's economy, I'll do all this other stuff. Well, he's also said, by the way, I'm gonna deal with hellfire and damnation on Hamas if they don't release the hostages. Well, okay, he's not the first American president to throw a lot of bluster and hot air out into the winds, but Putin doesn't want to risk that.
Right.
Putin in a way needs this war to end, but he needs this war to end on a certain set of circumstances.
So
Putin's got his problems now. He's got 21% inflation in Russia. They're moving strongly towards a recession. Casualties are horrible, and at a certain point, even the harshest regime of repression and oppression can't survive that for forever. Yeah. And Putin wants sanctions to go away.
Right. So last question then for you, Rob, is there are a lot of maximalist positions that Putin and the Kremlin have put forth. We've mentioned NATO. We've mentioned no outside forces. We've not mentioned, but the territorial points that have also been made that, all those areas, and they don't even control them all now, that they have said are theirs in eastern Ukraine, plus Crimea, is where in any of that long Kremlin list, do you think, are there items that you think when push comes to shove to end the war, there may be some give?
I don't see any indication that Putin is willing or prepared to concede anything. I mean, he wants all his terms to be accepted, and he doesn't want to concede anything. It gets right back to that old Russian maxim: "What's mine is mine, and yours is negotiable." So when Putin says, we're willing to consider this ceasefire, but we want a long-term strategic, we want a long-term peace agreement, which is practically impossible to achieve, in my opinion, given Putin's conditions. But I could see him conceding to a 30-day ceasefire to hand Donald Trump something, to keep Trump on side, if you will. But that's not going to happen until the Russians finish the job in Kursk, which they're apparently, they've captured or are close to capturing the rubble of Sudzha,
right?
But which is pretty close to the Ukrainian border, and used to be a major transportation and trade center. Now it's rubble. But he wants to finish that job and take away that one bit of negotiating leverage the Ukrainians might have in future talks.
Yeah. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Rob Dannenberg, thank you so much for being with us at the Cipher Brief. Really appreciate your insights, and I'm sure we'll want to talk again once a little of this gets clear. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Appreciate it.